And welcome to Vision of Unity. We are so glad that you have joined us at this time, and I want to welcome with you today. First of all, my name is Rodney Hall, and I'm going to be moderating this session, and I want to welcome with me today our special guest, Councilman Daniel Ruggles from District 1 here in Clinton, and also somebody that you all know from right here at Vision of Unity, Dr. Larry Watts. So we're going to jump right in here. If you've been following Facebook or the newspaper, we're just going to go ahead and address the elephant in the room. Very first thing, Mr. Ruggles, you seem to have upset a few people this week.
I think I did.
So I've got an editorial here from the Sampson Independent that was written on May 13th. And they kind of took you to task here, although we do not have a name, so we couldn't reach out for a comment. But
imagine
that. whoever wrote this article, they said our view, so I assume they're speaking for the newspaper. But they said several things. Let me read the title here. Ruggles rant shows lack of leadership. That's pretty strong language. So let's talk a little bit about what they talked here. Obviously, it has to do with the coronavirus, and particularly with the current shutdown that we're in. So I just want to address some points, and then we're going to kind of get into more fine, granular detail as we move into this. But a few points from the article that I wanted you to have the chance to address here was one is, and actually I'm going to ask Dr. Watts this question first, since he's an objective observer here. One of the things, Dr. Watts, this article says that Mr. Ruggles should not have criticized the governor or his actions on this virus and how he's handling this virus. Do you think that's a fair assessment? Does he have a right as a non-medical person to address this issue?
Well, I guess in communism we wouldn't. We probably could be reprimanded, but I think that is, I think, one of the things, freedom of speech. I don't know exactly how you could criticize that. I mean, we allow people to go in the streets, carry signs for a lot of other things. So I'm not really sure how somebody can make a statement like that. That'd be suppression of our rights that our forefathers established.
Thank you. That's a good point. And Mr. Ruggles, do you? What is your perspective on that? Because you're in the political game, as we call it. And so do you think that everybody in America should just fall in line with leadership, or should they have a right to speak out?
I think, like Dr. Watts stated, I agree with him on that. And one of the great things about America is to be able to have your opinion and be able to stand on principles, your convictions, your morals, and be able to have that freedom of speech. So I would agree that I agree with what Dr. Watts said on that.
Well, very good. Okay, well, I'm actually going to hit Dr. Watts up again, because another thing that the article said was that, well, first of all, I'll ask you, were you trying to sound like a medical expert?
No, not at all. I'm definitely not a medical expert. I have concerns in general with the economics. I have concerns in general with the community, families, and people will die. They die from the flu every year. They will die from coronavirus. And so I don't mean to belittle that or devalue it, but at the same time you have to look at what are the other costs that are attributed to the shutdown that's happened here, and what are the other costs that entails.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Watts, what's your thoughts on that? Does he have a right to speak to things that can touch on the medical?
Well, I think you should. I mean, the medical profession, we see things from one point of view, but ultimately we're not seeing the lives and the integration. We're seeing a patient in front of us, and we're seeing a blood pressure, we're seeing the labs, but we're not seeing the life that they're living. We know that economic balance has a huge impact on how our patients are. We know it from this current virus, for instance. We just had a study out in California that showed 0.07% in some of the upper class people that were upper middle to upper class spread, and then we had a huge difference between those that were living in different projects where it was more confined, less room, multi-dwelling housing. So absolutely. And if we want to look at from the perspective of support, I'm going to use a biblical quote on that. And one is, I've always looked, if there's two greatest sins in the Bible, so you might look at one perspective would be blasphemy of the Holy Spirit would be one that I'm excluding from that. But in Proverbs it said, the father that does not support his own is worse than an infidel.
Mm.
And when we think about what that means, it means you could pick any sin you want that would condemn you, and you would be worse than that. You might be talked to a murder, you might be whatever you wanted to pick. That's a pretty serious crime and offense, and that was stated by Solomon. So.
Very good. Well, Mr. Ruggles, you also said here in the, what they took you to task for. I'm not actually reading your post, which is available on Vote Ruggles at Facebook. But one of the things they challenged you on was that you had talked about flattening the curve, and you said that it had been achieved, and that was let me go back. You said that that was the original goal of the shutdown, of the quarantine, if we want to call it that, and that that had been achieved, but it seems like the goalpost keeps moving. Is that kind of what you were trying to get across?
Yeah. To elaborate a little bit on what Dr. Watts was saying, there's other expenses that happen with the shutdown. And so as these business owners, one thing that they look at is they can't provide for their families. They can't provide for themselves, which is sort of alluding to what Dr. Watts was saying there. And they also don't know when it's going to let up. They don't know, next Friday, are we going to go into phase 2? We don't know. Is phase 2 going to last 2 weeks, 3 weeks? We don't know. And so you really have to be able to know where those goalposts are to be able to prepare. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to a barberess just the other day, and even if they're allowed to go back to work, she doesn't know what requirements they'll have to go by, what guidelines they'll have to use. It may take her a week or two to be able to get masks or hand sanitizer or gloves.
Mm-hmm.
And so it may be June 1st, best case scenario, before she's cutting hair, she's coloring hair. And so those are the things that I look at from the economic standpoint. Mm-hmm. At that point.
So it's not just a matter of getting reopened, but knowing what you need to reopen.
Correct.
Okay,
Absolutely.
Good. Dr. Watts, any thoughts on that?
No, I totally agree. The reopening ambiguity is whatever their objectives. You probably remember that I showed a live model that showed the peaking out of our medical resources. I don't know if you recall that, but that was the objective. We did not want to exceed this medical maximum that we had in our individual cities. Of course, we've been mostly focused on New York. If we exceed that, somebody's not going to have a ventilator or some other essential, and that's a dilemma which was actually faced by Italy, where they actually had to decide somebody over a certain age could not be treated, and they just let them die without trying their best. And that's a very heart-wrenching decision to say, I'm God in a way. Mm-hmm. You cannot live any longer because I'm going to save somebody that has more value to society. And it's a really dangerous thing. Of course, it's being done in various socialist-based economies already right at this point. And so very important. So that was the preliminary thing. We were flattening the curve so that you didn't peak out, exceeding our medical capacity. That was the primary objective.
Okay. And you feel that we have we, I guess is the question, have we overexerted our medical resources?
There was never any place that was really exceeded that couldn't have been dealt with. We actually have more ICU capacity than almost any country in the world.
So what do you think is the reason behind this, I guess the constant pushing of the narrative that we need to remain shut down?
Well, I think it's turned into more of a political barrier because, as you'll find out, some of this never really made sense scientifically.
But they keep saying they're following the science. So you're saying they're not always following the science.
They're not following the science.
Okay. Spoken as a scientist here, he's saying they're not following the science.
No. And I've probably studied more varied opinions than I think anybody. I've wanted to lead my patients, and I want to be part of our partnership at Clinton Medical Clinic. I'm not going to dictate what any one of our doctors do. We all practice differently.
Right.
And I can't say that one's better than the other. We're living in a time where nobody has a defined cure that you can open up this cookbook and say, I need to treat this patient with this. So we're relying on what we call anecdotal consideration of people around the world. What have they done? Has it worked? But we have to go through this critical peer review and the other things, and that part, we haven't had time to do that. You know, when you're in the middle of a pandemic, you know, in the 8 weeks that we've really been pressured for this, you know, to come up with a solution. But I believe that those are kind of coming out as what's good, what's not too good, might be hopeful, those kind of things we are developing. But that's the last thing that I want, is to not be able to do something, to say I'm going to sit back and do nothing is really hard for me. You know, if I look in the CDC guidelines right now, they said there's no cure. If I look in the FDA and several of our other federal recommendations, they're going to say there's no cure. Am I going to accept that?
Right.
And is there hope?
Mr. Ruggles, getting back to our article here before we get into more details, and we are going to touch into some more details on those things. But another thing that the editorial said about you was that you spoke disparagingly about some restaurants while cheering other restaurants on. I didn't catch that in that post. Maybe you edited the post later. I don't know. Did you speak disparagingly about some of our restaurants here in town?
If I did, I don't know exactly how it was. Definitely not on purpose. But no, what I meant to say, or what I did say on it, is restaurants like Rib Eyes, Ted's, Alfredo's, they have been far damaged more. They've had much more damage to their business than somewhere like Domino's or Bojangles or any restaurant that's already had a drive-through, that's already had a pickup or carry out or delivery service naturally with that type of business. And so my issue in general is when you have these sit-down restaurants is that were just closed, just like that.
Right.
And they weren't given any options, and it was just like that. And they tried to do the outside dining. They tried to work with it a little bit, and that was shut down, I think, the next day. I think that lasted a day or two. And along those lines were barbers and cosmetologists where it was just, boom, you closed. No options, no anything, and yet you can go to Lowe's and they have long lines. You know, you can stand there for 20 minutes and look at tile for your backsplash. You could look at 20 minutes and be looking at which rose bush to buy in the garden center, but you can't be one-on-one with a barber who's been trained in barbicide, disinfectant, PPE. There's no logical reasoning for how the law is being carried out, in my opinion.
And so you think it's being handled out or meted out unfairly to our citizens and to our community?
Correct. And I mean, you could argue...
This isn't a personal rant. This is as a representative of this community.
Absolutely. As a representative of my constituents, some are business owners, some are not, some use the businesses. It's unfair. It's just not right, is the way that I put it. It's just not right.
Excellent. Well, let's finish this up and we'll dig into some deeper issues here. I'm just going to read this little quote here from this editorial. It says, "As for Ruggles, we are saddened by his lack of judgment and angered at the poor example he set for a fine city and its residents. The city council should seriously consider taking him to task for his actions. It may be the only way he learns to think before he acts." Dr. Watts, is that fair?
That does not sound too fair to me. When you think about arbitrator, in science, and that's one of the things, when we close our minds, we're going to shut down science too. You've got to be able to listen to both sides objectively. If you've already made your opinion about somebody and you do not understand the perspective, you've not studied them. It's like if you watch CNN, you watch MSNBC, and you watch Fox, there's a little different perspective. Probably the biggest perspective is when you get into opinions. So absolutely. When you see opposing opinions, you're just going to go with opinions that match my views, or you're going to find truth somewhere in this mess.
One of the things that makes Dr. Watts a special expert in this area is that he's not just someone who's worked at a clinic for a long time, not that there's anything wrong with that, but he's had a lot of dealings with a lot of different kinds of diseases and epidemics and things like that in other countries through his mission work for how long now?
Well, 30 years.
30
almost.
years.
Yeah, I actually started back in medical school, I guess.
And so you've had conversations with the World Health Organization in the past.
Oh, yes.
And all of these things.
Conflicts, too.
What's that?
Conflicts, too.
Conflicts too. You're not the only one nowadays, but so these are reasons why we definitely want to get your perspective on this, because some of these people may not know it. They may just think you're a doctor. Because one of the things that Mr. Ruggles got criticized for was not talking to any doctors. So we wanted to put him here with a doctor. We have some video of one of the foremost experts, and Dr. Watts, you're far more familiar with his field of study, so I'm going to ask you to introduce him, and then we're going to show a few clips to talk about those.
Well, who we're going to show is he's a professor with epidemiology, and he's actually in this country, but he's been trained overseas in Germany. And when we look at his expertise, we see Dr. Fauci on TV a lot. And so people have a tendency to think this is his expertise, but it's actually not. He's an infectious disease doctor. But an epidemiologist is a totally different animal. Now, I hate to put us as animals, but a doctor looks at an individual, and an epidemiologist looks at the safety of a whole organization, which might be a community, a country, or a nation.
Would that be kind of comparable to like a psychologist and a sociologist?
Actually, it's almost as close of an exact comparison as you could get. So when you look at the wisdom that he has is different than the wisdom that Dr. Fauci would have started with, trained as a medical doctor and became an infectious disease specialist, which is, you start out with internal medicine and then you do a fellowship in specifically infectious disease. Now, I know Dr. Fauci's had to study epidemiology. All of us have a little bit of epidemiology. It was emphasized at Loma Linda because they have hospitals all over the world, 200 hospitals, 650 clinics worldwide. So where I trained was emphasized even more than probably the average medical school, just because of their range of what they did. And that's kind of what I wanted when I went there. And of course, the other aspect is I could go anywhere in the world and they had a place I could go to. So that, to me, it was a helpful thing. And Dr. Pollinari, he's a family practice doctor, and he went into Master of Public Health, and epidemiology is a big part of the study of that. How do you find the safety for a community? And epidemiology is at least a partial study in that. But this is an expert in epidemiology.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, one of the things that has been a part of this discussion, because a lot of what we're focused on because of Councilman Ruggles' post and then the responding newspaper article, has been, is it legitimate to question this shutdown? Is it time to restart? If we do restart, how should we restart? And try to look at it from a balanced, objective approach. And so one of the things that was involved early on, we talked about the flattening of the curve, was the idea of when the peak infection actually occurred. And I think he's going to argue that it was actually earlier than we thought it was. So let's take a look.
Okay.
So what we see around the 18th must have been events or infections that were around the 8th. And if the infections peaked around the 8th, shutting down schools and restaurants and the economy about 10 days later is something that is totally absurd. And if in an epidemic the worst is already over, to say, okay, then let's shut down the economy and cause 26 million people lose their jobs, because it's so fun seeing them losing their jobs, I think that is heartless.
All right, so that was pretty interesting. Dr. Watts, what are the implications of what he's saying here?
Well, what he's trying to talk, we sometimes operate as a society on the emotion of something, but the emotion, what we needed to operate as where the silent storm was coming, seeing other infections in other areas. And I think Dr. Witkowski has well described this. In fact, he was one of several leaders that were in epidemiology that were credited for many of the countries doing what they did, including Sweden. Now, we'll find out after the fact. It's always easy to look backwards
Right.
and say, I was really smart back then if you made the right decision, or somebody else can say you're really dumb when you made the wrong. So we got to be careful about criticizing people. But he actually did see this happening in advance. And I think our people did too, but I think we're a society that's operating based on emotion so much time. So when you look at,
And what is that emotion? Is that fear?
well, I think fear is the biggest thing. And people in leadership in other places, people can market to fear. They can sell things to fear. They can get us to do things based on response to fear. So when we look at what does this really mean? So we had our peak infection rate, but we didn't see the disease and the death and the dying. Some of that happened 24 to 40 days later. Because remember, these people are going into the hospital at
Right.
10 days out, and then they may be off the vent, and then they end up on the vent, and they may be struggling for up to 28 days, which is one of the people I think we may interview at some point. He was in the ICU up at Rex for 28 days. But so when we look at that, we see that part, but we don't see the disease that started this whole thing. Where if you're an epidemiologist, you have to see the silent killer before it becomes the clinical disease. So we're talking about the infection versus the clinical manifestations.
Mr. Councilman Ruggles, was that your concern? Was that part of what you were trying to say in all this?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't have the medical background, obviously, but just looking at the facts, looking at the numbers, and then beyond all that, looking at the economic damage that's happening. And it's like, a lot of times in medical, they say, well, we want to do something to save one life. But what you've got to look at is the economic cost, because poverty takes
Poverty
lives.
kills, yeah.
It kills. And so that's one thing, depression kills.
Absolutely.
Domestic violence kills. And those are all shown to increase with economic downturn. And so, it's awesome to have Dr. Watts here sort of validating some of my original article there. I appreciate that. But it's like now we've damaged our economy to this level for possibly no positive result health-wise, and now our poverty's going up. We have food supply chain issues, distribution issues. It's just we don't know how far it's going to go.
And that takes us into the second part of this, which is the economic damage. So let's see what our professor had to say about that.
So 3 weeks ago, I was sitting here and had already published a manuscript showing that the epidemic would be over soon, that this was just a regular flu, and that there was no reason whatsoever to close schools, and in particular not to run the whole economy against the wall. The damage that was done to the economy is immense, and even if there had been a few more deaths than in a regular flu, which it wasn't, but even then, the huge damage done to the economy could not be justified by whatever was known, even at the time when people started with the so-called social distancing, or the second prohibition, exactly 100 years after the first prohibition. And we already knew how effective the first prohibition.
So it sounds like the professor is saying, is agreeing with you, Councilman Ruggles, that at least he believes that you're right, that we shouldn't have shut all this down. You're our political expert here on this panel. So what is your fear about emerging from this, 8 weeks now roughly that we're in?
Yeah, we're at 8 weeks, and one issue is we don't know, it could be another 8 weeks. We have no idea. I mean, our governor, we think he's going to open it up to phase 2 Friday. It could last 4 weeks. It could last 1 week. We don't know. And so we don't know when we do have the opportunity to start to dig out, we still don't know how far we're going to be digging out from. We still don't know how deep that economic hole is going to be. And so we were looking at the budget of the day, and we've already cut our budget currently that we're looking at as a council has dropped a lot for what it was a year ago. And in my opinion, I still don't know if that's a conservative enough effort just based off of Brooks Brothers announcing they're going from Garland. We've got businesses downtown that are saying, "Hey, we're done," and I fear that there'll be a lot more of that, and so it really until we do start seeing the light. And start seeing how far out we have to dig from, I really don't know. But,
So this is a huge ripple effect, right? You've got obviously the people who own the businesses are affected, but then you also have the landlords
Absolutely.
that are affected, or the mortgage holders, whichever it might
Absolutely.
be. You also have the employees who are affected, and ultimately, where you set the tax revenue
Absolutely.
is affected. So,
Absolutely.
Do we have any idea at this point what the number is on the economic impact for Clinton and Sampson County? I know Clinton would be your expert, but
We've got a couple panels. North Carolina League of Municipalities, they throw some numbers out there, but at this point, I don't think I could give you an accurate number. I really don't think the ripple effect, even if it was to open today. We could probably run some numbers and say if it opened up today, this is an educated guess at what it would cost tax base wise, what it would cost job wise, because all those tax dollars, when you have a vacant business, that's an empty shell. You don't have anybody paying your water hookup, you don't have anybody paying the power bill, you don't have sales tax, you don't have payroll tax. You don't have any of that. And so when you look from a city council standpoint, from a conservative view, we've got to figure out how to fund fire departments, police officers, water, sewer. You don't just get money out of thin air. It comes from your tax base. And so it really concerns me when you look at that tax base and what's happening and still not to know, to reiterate, not know when it's going to open, when that door is going to open and let us get back to business. Because this phase two, if it lets restaurants get to 30% capacity, 50% capacity, 60% capacity, we don't know. So,
and when we're looking at restaurants, I've had several jobs in my life, but that was one of them. And one of the things I remember about the restaurant business was that our margins were razor thin. I mean, everything was based on how well you could control your food cost, how well you could control your dining room, how well you can control. And so if we're only at 50%, is that even viable for some of our restaurateurs?
I'm not a restaurateur, but I like to eat at them. I like good food. But no, I don't think it is. And I don't know at what percentage you'd have to be able to start breaking even. I don't know if you have to have 80%, 60%, but I can tell you right now, the restaurants like Ribeyes, they're a prime example. Ted's, Alfredo's, Ruby Tuesdays, probably, they are losing money. It's not possible to not be losing money when you've got the sales drops. And so I don't know. I don't know if 50% would 60%. My guess would be probably 75% or north would be somewhere in there where they could be making a profit. But the other side,
at least holding their own. Maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. The other side is, how long is it going to take once they do get 100% open? How long is it going to take to compensate for the loss that they've accrued in the last 6 weeks?
Right.
Is it going to take all of next year? And so as an economy, I look at that and I say, if it takes a year to make up for what they've lost in 6 weeks, what are they going to not do? Are they not going to expand their restaurant now? Are they not going to hire extra staff? Are they not, if you're a farmer, are you not going to do maintenance that you would typically be doing, And so
or buying new equipment.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, guess what? We're not going to.
Avalanche.
Yeah, it's an avalanche. It's a spiraling staircase down, and you just don't know. There's no way. I don't think there's any way to know the exact extent of the damage at this point.
Now, the numbers I've heard at the national level, and this was a few weeks ago, so it may be even worse than this now, but that we had lost 10 years of economic growth. And certainly in eastern North Carolina, that ripples down to us. Well, it really doesn't ripple down to us. It starts with us. We're a part of that number. So it's quite frightening. Dr. Watts, what do you think on all this?
Well, there's something that would surprise you about the loss. Okay, we were talking about medical resources. when New York was peaking out, they were laying off people. Nationwide, our hospitals are filing bankruptcy and right at the very edge. That's why they're talking about bailouts. And there's a lot of reason that happened. They stopped all elective surgeries.
Right.
And then we end up finding out we actually depressed disease. We had, less flu than we ever had. Our nursing home, less disease than we ever had. Pediatrics, probably 50 to 70% less disease in pediatrics. So
Because the kids weren't
yeah,
together,
yeah,
basically?
they weren't together, spreading
Right.
it like we normally let them do.
Now, before you move on with that, let me ask you, because I've heard some concern, I don't know if this is real or not, you're the doctor, but that the other side of that is that the kids aren't picking up the immunities that they normally would.
Well, and that's absolutely true.
Okay.
There's several sides to immunity. We talk about acquired and innate immunity. When kids go into isolation, of course, it's only innate immunity. It's not an acquired immunity. And there's a lot of aspects to that. We've actually looked at allergies in kids that go to daycare, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to have less allergies than kids that are isolated to this perfectly pristine environment. So there's different aspects that we've looked at from science.
So all of us living in a hamster bubble is probably not a good idea.
Probably not a good idea. We won't survive in the real world when we leave that bubble. And so, my mom used to have a little picture up there that says, my house is clean enough to be healthy and dirty enough to be happy. And so we got to find that balance in our life, there. And I think that's an important aspect. But the hospital, can you imagine we're talking about medical resources specifically for COVID, and we shut down all other aspects of the hospital. Now doctors are going to try to be making up this whole thing. Now the other aspects of this, there was all sorts of people. There's deaths that happened because we didn't do these procedures. People were waiting on cardiac catheterization interventions, and of course included knee surgeries and other types of things. One that I know recently was gallbladder surgery, which ended up being a major problem. Wow. She ended up not going from an elective 4-hour I'm back home to now all of a sudden she's got complications because she waited too late because they did not want to do this. We aren't.
So all of this is adding a tremendous cost to the whole system.
So it's the medical side of it. You would think we'd be busier than ever, right? The way we're talking about. But, I'll have a slide if you want to look at the number of deaths that we're focusing on. We're talking about a very small percentage of our total deaths during the same time, 870,000 deaths. At the time, we got 60,000 COVID, and then you could share the 20,000 that we've had that were COVID and pneumonia. But we had over 80,000 pneumonia and no COVID.
Wow.
And, so our perspective is kind of skewed
the same way sort of those other costs, those other lives over costs because of the procedures that weren't happening, the routine ones. Economically, it's the same way. Because of this action not happening, this purchase not happening, this investment not happening, it's almost impossible to really see it downstream and say, this didn't happen, because of this business purchase. Economically, it's a spiraling staircase.
Wow, and that we could probably spend a couple weeks just talking about all of
There's a lot.
The cascading effect of this thing. But in our time we have together, you mentioned, Dr. Watts, herd immunity, and I believe our professor has some thoughts on that as well. So let's take a look at the idea of herd immunity.
But as we have seen now, and at least since yesterday in New York, where the New York Times reported that at least 21% of the population are already immune, I think I'm now vindicated that what I said 3 weeks ago when we had the first interview here was correct.
This herd immunity, then, now, Dr. Watts, you've actually spoken to this on some of our other videos.
I did a couple months ago, actually.
And we talk about the idea of the R-naughts, right? Can you give us just a brief summary of that again?
Yeah, R-naught is actually an epidemiologic description of how easily a disease spreads. We know one of the bad part about this disease and other respiratory diseases, they all actually generally are fast spreaders. This one has an infection rate of about 83%. When you take a confinement area and given a certain amount of minutes, 83% of those people in that confinement area would have the disease. But R0 refers to if one has the disease, how many people will he spread that to? And so we've seen numbers in China and other countries where they're highly populated. New York might be one of those where you're stacked on top of each other, living in these tenement housing issues, and that you may have an R0 as high as 6 in some areas, which means for every person that gets it, they will spread to 6. Each one of those will spread to 6, and so forth. Typically, R0 is less than that. Now, my home area is Montana, which they're totally open. They're just following every case. They've only had 400 some cases, barely more than we've had in our county, and just a few deaths in the whole state. So they actually didn't shut down.
Okay.
But their numbers are small enough that they're tracking every case and every contact. And so
Now, along those lines, you had actually also mentioned Sweden, who did not shut down.
that's right.
And they've caught some flack. I believe I heard one of the news commentators basically say, well, that proved that didn't work. But you don't necessarily agree with that, do you?
No, I think they're going to be proven to be a lot smarter than most people.
Tell us why.
And their numbers are fairly close. I should have a slide of their more recent numbers. Now, at one time, they were about 50% higher mortality than what we were in the beginning. But our mortality has kind of merged closer and closer. Per million, they were somewhere in the neighborhood of about 32, and we were about 26. But they seem to be coming closer to our death rate. They're actually better than several of the countries in Europe that did lock down, which is kind of interesting.
Including Italy, I believe.
Especially Italy,
Italy.
and Spain and others that were in there. In fact, they were considerably less than, almost about 30-40%.
And this was with social distancing,
with social
but no
distancing
shutdown.
only. And
Okay.
the kids all went to school. They did like we're trying to do. Unfortunately, that we did not trigger things soon enough. Like New York, for instance, 1/3 of all of their deaths were nursing homes. 1/5 of all of our deaths are nursing homes countrywide in the whole U.S. But so that was one of their focuses. They did mess up in the beginning, which affected their death rate early. They have very large nursing home complexes compared to some of their other surrounding countries like Norway, for instance. And so that was a different setup there. But for the most part, they never shut down restaurants, but they did socially distance. And their people generally are more responsive than our people. Now, we typically will average 25 to upper 30s, and we've had up to 66,000 die. In fact, 2017, we had well over 60,000 die from the flu, and we didn't shut down. I mean, we're not at the safe zone that we are 4 years out from H1N1.
Right.
Because we think that we could document, but we didn't go through this antibody testing because it wasn't lethal, so it didn't scare people.
Right,
the media
right.
wasn't chasing this around like they are now, which is just frightening everybody.
And we have learned, just to clarify here, we have learned, I believe, that this is not anywhere near as lethal as what was first anticipated.
Oh no, far less lethal.
Okay.
In fact, we're talking about magnitude difference potentially. Yeah, our World Health Organization mentioned 3.4%.
Right.
Oh, thankfully, it's not anywhere near that. Estimates have been as low as a regular flu to about less than 1%.
So, Councilman Ruggles, so let's look at this. I know that you do Clinton, but obviously all of these, I think I heard somebody say one time, and you might know who the quote came from, but all politics is local, right? And so really everything
correct.
builds from here. I mean, city council or the county board of supervisors, these are the guys, this is the starting point of all politics, really. And the truth of the matter is, although we have medical experts that inform our public policy, it is politicians who create our public policy. So as we're looking at this type of herd immunity, I believe Dr. Watts had told us earlier before this conversation that 100,000 people die of alcohol-related deaths each year, whether it be directly from poisoning or from car accidents or killing other people through car accidents or whatever, but it kills. As a matter of fact, we've kept the ABC stores open. I believe you put that in your original post, right?
I did.
So why are we, or maybe you don't have the answer to that, but maybe you want to address it in a different way. But if you do, why are we addressing this so differently than we do the flu, than we do alcohol, than we do all these other ways that we die? Because there's a lot of ways for us to die.
Yeah, I have to say, and some people may disagree, I personally think it's political more than anything else. On the same regard that Dr. Watts was talking about, the death rate is so much lower. I think the economic cost is going to be so much greater than what people think it's going to be.
I think we're like $6 trillion further in debt now based on the current things that have happened as a nation. How long can we survive that? And what do we look like at the end of this?
Yeah, and one thing that I have to say is, personally, every life is valuable.
Absolutely.
It is.
Every life is valuable. So regardless of economic issues that may arise, you've got to look at, on just the health side, what's costing more lives, shutting down the medical facilities versus the coronavirus risk there, but then also on the economic side, shutting it down and causing loss of life from poverty and economic downturn, depression, suicides, domestic violence, abuse, just childhood hunger. We don't like to talk about that a whole lot, but kids not being in school, that's sometimes the healthiest food they get. And so you just have to look at that chain reaction all the way down, and what is the value of that one life when you talk about, we're going to shut down the economy for one life. What life are you talking about? Which life is that's the most important?
Absolutely. So these are legitimate issues to talk about.
Absolutely.
We may disagree on them as a culture, but it's not fair, I don't think, to just simply say, well, Councilman Ruggles, you don't have a right to talk about that, because there is another side to it.
I think there is. And I think on the medically side, I've sort of been vindicated here.
Well, I didn't know exactly what we were going to do today, but I don't want to be disrespectful to whoever comment, because I just read that for the first time. I'm so isolated in medicine till 1 every morning. I don't get to see the real world sometimes. But if we stop thinking and we shut down freedom of speech, we're going to miss out on science. Why didn't we consider what other people were talking about? When we're doing this thing, we know that one study estimated during this time we'd have 75,000 more suicides.
Wow.
If you extrapolated the 55% increased consumption of alcohol, now I don't know how far that's going to go beyond that 100,000, and there's so many other things. The idea that we're going to lose millions of people more than we're going to lose from COVID, because the economic damage to all these countries that help other lesser countries. And I don't know, are they going to be the silent ones that are going to die?
Now, most people know that Vision of Unity is a division or a part of Global Medical Outreach. It's a Christian organization. How important are Christians to this community?
They are the key to the community. The churches, the outreach. There's more. Typically, there's much more outreach from churches than government assistance. Whether that is, and maybe not EBD card type things, but getting kids role models that they can look up to, needs that need to be met. They are instrumental, and they're what builds the community, in my opinion.
Very good. All right. So the last thing that we wanted to bring out from our professor was the question on, should we go back to normal? And then we're going to let you address that. So, Professor, take it away, virtually speaking.
So what we should do immediately, now that we know that we already have developed herd immunity, despite of that social distancing, at least to some level, so that we have immunity in a quite relevant portion of the population. We should open schools and businesses yesterday at the latest. There is no reason whatsoever to wait. The worst thing that could happen is we get a bit of a rebound. That will not be catastrophic. that will not overload the hospitals. It will be less than we had so far. That could happen. But everything else that we do is a lot worse than what could happen if we, let's say, have another 10, 20,000 cases. Could be. It's not the end of the world. We should go back to be a strong economy, to work, to have a social life, to let children being educated, do everything our society should do. And that lockdown there's no benefit, it has only negative effects.
Okay, so it sounds like the professor believes we should go back to work or start getting back to normal. You agree with that, Councilman Ruggles?
I would agree 110%. I think it is imperative that we get back, we open up, and, take the precautions that we need to, obviously. Take the needed precautions, but get people back working and get things back to normal, get the tax base back, get people socializing, building up the social life, encouraging each other's. And as Dr. Watts, the social aspect is a health aspect. And so it's just, there's so many different angles just so many extra lives that are caused based off of this one shutdown to fix the death loss from this one disease. The actual cost is drastic.
Wow. Doc, talk to me about churches. I know that's been a concern of yours.
Yeah, I have a big concern with the shutdown of businesses in general and how it was done, but I have a much greater concern for the shutdown of churches and how that was handled, and really just disagree with it 100%. I think that we should use our judgment if we're scared, if we're high risk, if we have some of the factors that Dr. Watts talked about. But for the government to come in and say, hey, you cannot meet inside that building with any more than 10 people, whether it's for a prayer group, to pray for somebody that may have cancer, to pray for somebody going through a struggle, to have fellowship with fellow Christians or whatever religion you're with. I have a strong disagreement with that part.
Well, very good. So hopefully we'll be back with our church families soon too, but practicing the safe way, as Dr. Watts says, because we do want to love our neighbors as ourselves. So we want to thank all of you for being a part of Vision of Unity today with our special guest, Councilman Ruggles from the 1st District in Clinton.
I'd like to say it's an honor to be up here with you, Pastor Ronnie, you, Dr. Watts. And I always, even with people that may have disagreed with my opinion, I hope and pray I can always stand on my principles, my morals, and my convictions. And if I can't do that, then I've failed, in my opinion. But it is an honor and pleasure to be on this panel and also to serve the citizens of District 1 as your city councilman.
Well, thank you very much. We greatly appreciate you being here, and it's always great to have people who love God as a part of our government. We need more of them, so thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, God bless you all. We hope you've enjoyed this time. And if you have any questions for Dr. Watts or for anybody that we can pull in to talk to and try to hopefully answer your questions, that's what we're here for. We're here to serve you and to give you the information that you're looking for during these times. So God bless you. Have a great day.